I don't know, sorry. Test, okay. There we go. We'll just go ahead and get started. I don't know how many people have joined us online, but Ms. Martinez has a really great presentation scheduled for us. And what I'll do also is I emailed each of you a link to a Google Doc, and I'll also put it in the chat. And so if you, the idea with that is, as we're going through the presentation, if you have questions, you could type that question in that Google Doc, and then, because it might be bilingual specific, it might be Title I specific. And so those individuals might not be here today, but then we can get you an answer to it this week. Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. All right. Ms. Martinez?
Good morning. Thank you everyone for being here today. My name is Ludim Martinez and I'm the Associate Superintendent for Finance. So today we're going to go over school budgets. It will be a high-level overview. And so to begin, I think one of the questions we want to answer, we need to know, is how are schools funded? Money from public schools comes from a variety of funding sources at the state, local, and federal level. To understand the concept of operating school budgets, one must first recognize that school districts organize their accounting systems on a fund basis. A fund is a unique code used to segregate accounts for the purpose of carrying on specific activities. It is established to demonstrate the financial resources, to demonstrate that the financial resources are being used for the intended purpose. Okay. Okay, I'm sorry. Is that better? Okay, great. Are you able to, can you hear me? Okay, let me, is that better?
Okay, start. I can't tell until you start.
What was that? I couldn't hear. Oh, okay. All right. Okay. To understand how school districts use their money, I want you to think of a fund as a bucket. So think of your personal finances as different buckets. For example, you may have your vacation bucket, that's where you put your vacation money. Maybe you have your mortgage bucket where you put your mortgage money. And so every bucket has an intended purpose. Now, Gadsden has over 38 different funds, or what we'll call buckets. Each bucket starts with a 5-digit unique code. For example, 11,000, which is operational, or maybe 13,000, which is transportation, and so on. Again, like your personal finances, each bucket has a designated purpose. For example, your transportation bucket is used to bus students to and from school, where your student nutrition bucket is used for student meals. Typically, you don't want to take money from your student nutrition bucket and put it in your transportation bucket, or money from your transportation bucket and use it for your student nutrition bucket. So every bucket has its own set of rules and regulations. Now, furthermore, these buckets are grouped based on their funding source and the rules that govern what you can and cannot use these buckets for. The general funds are the chief operating funds of the district. These funds begin with a 1 in front of them, followed by 4 digits. For example, you have your operational fund, which is your 11,000 fund. You have your 13, which is your transportation, and you can see they all begin with a 1. Then you have special revenue funds. These are funds that are legally restricted for specific purposes. So some of these funds are federal funds, and they work on on they work along with an application. You usually have to submit a fund application, and on that application, it tells you exactly how these funds should be used. Then we have capital project funds, and so these are mostly resources for the acquisition and construction of facilities. These start with a 3. So there's a 331-100, which is our famous bond building. This is where we sell our GEO bonds. That's where that revenue stream comes from. And then we have our debt service funds. Our debt service funds is account for the accumulation of resources used to pay long-term debt. So when we issue our GEO bonds or our EdTech notes, we use these funds to gather the revenue streams to pay the principal and interest on this loans. Now, to help me further explain how the fund basis of accounting works, we are going to focus on one bucket. So we're going to take one bucket, and that's going to be our operational fund bucket. And so now remember that each fund or bucket has its own set of revenues, expenditures, liabilities, and fund balance. A fund balance is created or increased when fund revenues exceed fund expenditures. Correspondingly, a fund's balance is decreased when fund expenditures exceed fund revenues. And so to explain this, think of a bucket. And so in this bucket, you have your revenues coming in, so it's money going into the bucket, and then you have expenditures, so it's money leaving the bucket. Now, that's not your fund balance. You also have to consider that there are liabilities, which could be like IOUs, or maybe you owe me. And so a fund balance represents the fund's total assets minus its liabilities. Now, the thing about fund balance is you have your fund balance at the end of the school year, and that fund balance carries over as the beginning balance for the next school year. So when you start your school year, then you get revenues. Now, here I'm going to go over 3 revenue sources. There's a couple others, but we're going to cover 3 of the major revenue sources. And the first is our state equalization guarantee, also called SEG, ad valorem, and E-rate. So in the state of New Mexico, the state equalization guarantee accounts for more than 95% of a school district's operating budget. The state provides districts money for day-to-day operations through a distribution called the SEG. Now, in its most simplified form, this amount is determined by student enrollment on the average of the 80th and 120th day counts. A cost multiplier is applied to the student counts depending on grade level, and it generates units. Other programs that generate units are your special education, bilingual, extended learning time, K through 5 plus, and at-risk units. These programs have weighted factors that generate different units. Now you take the sum of all those units, and those are multiplied times the unit value. The unit value is a dollar value set by the New Mexico Public Education annually that correlates to the appropriation established by the New Mexico legislature. The unit value can be adjusted twice in a fiscal year as prescribed by law. The initial unit value is set in March as a planning amount to build the following school year's budget. Then in February, the unit value is finalized. So what that means is here in March, usually around spring budget, we receive a planning unit value, or it's called the initial unit value. And what we do is we take this formula and we multiply the units generated times this initial unit value, and it generates a dollar value. So we plan next year's budget against this dollar value. Now, the following year, around February, the unit value is finalized, meaning it could go up or it can go down. For the most part, lately it's been going up, but just know that it can go down. If that final unit value goes down, then we have to reduce our budget. Now, the final unit value for the 21-22 school year was $4,863 for this current year. And our SEG, our estimated SEG for this school year is $127,684,565. Other sources of revenue are ad valorem taxes, and this is basically revenue collected from property taxes within the district's geographical boundaries. And so a mill rate, and remember Gadsden has a 2-mill levy, a mill rate is the amount of tax payable per dollar of the assessed value of a property. The mill rate is based on mills, 1 mill being equivalent to 1/10 of 1 cent or 0.001. Property tax in dollar terms is calculated by multiplying the assessed property value and the mill rate and then divided by 1,000. And so the assessed valuation is a dollar value assigned to your property for purposes of calculating applicable taxes. This year, the operational, or as of February 28th, the operational portion of the ad valorem taxes received was $305,260. Now, when we receive this revenue, some of it is allocated to our operational, some of it is allocated to our long-term debt funds, the ones starting with 40, some of it is allocated to our capital projects, so it's a distribution that is separated into different funds. The other is E-rate. E-rate is a program that provides discounts to assist eligible schools districts to obtain affordable internet access and telecommunication services. Discounts range from 20 to 90% of the cost of eligible services, depending on the level of poverty and the urban or rural status of the school district. Last year, Gadsden received about $78,000 in E-rate revenue. The district's discount rate is between 85 to 90%, so that's actually, it's high, and so that's good for us. And then we have other revenue sources like rents. I know we collect rent from CRUA. And then we have others like school fees. We have collections for lost and stolen textbooks or sometimes broken Chromebooks. And so that's also deposited into our operational fund. And then we have indirect cost. And right now that rate for this year is for some funds, not all funds. I think pre-K is an exception. The rate is a little bit different, but for most funds, it's 3.93%. And so every month we run a report, we see what the expenditures were for a certain month, and we apply this rate. And so it's basically a service fee that the operational fund charges the others funds for managing their funds, kind of like an administrative fee. Now, to better explain, well, let's see. Okay, so then we have, here we have expenditures. And so just like revenues, where we have the majority of our revenues coming from our SEG, from SEG dollars, over 95%, we have expenditures, and our salaries and benefits are the majority of what, you know, what that revenue goes toward, or the majority part, or the biggest part of our expenditures. Usually those can range from 86 to 95% of the expenses. We also have insurance premiums. Insurance premiums are probably, I think right now they're about $2.5 million. And we have utilities. We usually budget, you know, the costs are around $5 million for the district. And then we have costs for instructional materials, which is about $1.2 million. Now, if you remember, remember on that other slide, you saw that there was a specific fund for instructional materials. It was a 13,000 fund. That fund is going away. For some reason now, PED is funding instructional materials through our SEG, so it's going to our operational fund, and so they're separating out there. So that fund, I think this year we've expended the last of it, so it won't be one that we budget for the 22-23 fiscal year. Yes, ma'am.
So did PED tell you when they started doing that, or when did that take place, and did they communicate that to us?
They did communicate that to us. I want to say it was about 2 years ago when they said that they were going to, there was funds in there, and so they were just going to go ahead and expend what, we were to expend what was left, and then that fund would be becoming part of our SCG. I think it was about 2 years ago. Okay, and then just a reminder that all expenditures should be allowable and aligned to the district's educational objectives. Now, to better explain how expenditures are tracked, I have an example of an operational report. And so what I want to go through is the different columns on this expenditure report. So if you look at this first column where it says budget, that total right there is when the school board approves the initial budget for the school year. That is where you would find what was budgeted. So that's your initial budget. That's what the board approves, usually around May, June. That's the board approval's budget. Then you have a second column, and that one is called adjustments. Anytime we have a bar, we have those increase bars or decrease bars that come to the board for approval, those are adjustments to the initial budget. So those may increase certain line items, as you know, or they may decrease your initial budget. And so that GL budget, which is that third column, is the balance. So if we were to take, for example, the technology line item, which is this technology, this is 44, you can see that the initial budget as approved by the board was $3 million. There was an adjustment, so there was an increase bar, and it could be one or several bars during the year, that totaled that additional $1.6 million. And so right now, that budget is sitting at $4.7 million. And so that is your budget. Now then you have that current column. What that is when you run the report, if say you were to run it just for the month of February, it would show you your expenditures just for the month of February. However, the next column over, which is the year-to-date, YTD, that is your expenditures from the beginning of the fiscal year to the day you run the report. And so we typically like to use this column, because then what you do is you take your general budget, which is your budget, you subtract your year-to-date expenditures, and that's your balance. You have a balance, right? And then I want to talk about the next column, which is your encumbrance. And so to do that, I'm going to talk or go on to this next slide. An encumbrance is a restriction placed on the use of funds. When a purchase order is created, funds are set aside to ensure that there will be sufficient funds to pay for that specific obligation. By using encumbrances, the district can be assured that it will not overextend its finances. Encumbrances are important in determining how many funds are available. So looking back at the formula or what we were doing earlier, you have your general budget, right? You're going to subtract your year-to-date expenditures, and then we also subtract encumbrances, because although encumbrances have not been expended, they are obligations. And so that gives you your available budget. And so as part of what our monthly reports to the board, there is a an internal review that we do. And on that internal review, we have a review for after-the-fact POs. This is the reason those are so important, is because we don't want anybody going out there and committing district funds without notifying finance about it through a purchase order. What the purchase order does is it makes sure that those budgets are obligated, and this way we don't overextend the budget, or we don't spend money that we do not have available. And so just to simplify the example, if you have a $2 budget for lunch and you buy gum for 25 cents and you know that you got to buy your lunch, which is $1.25, so you have that money in your pocket, but you can't spend it, so it's in a way it's encumbered. So really, anybody wants to borrow money, you can only lend them 50 cents, because if you dip into your encumbrances, you're not going to have lunch, right? Okay, so going back to the report, we saw earlier, we have our balance, but from that balance, we need to account for our encumbrances, because those funds are obligated. And so that last column you see where it says budget balance, that's really the money available. If you needed to, or if technology needed to make another investment, then they would look at this report and say, okay, really, I'm looking at that $2.5 million. That's really all I have available, because the rest of the money is committed. And so you can see that as of the time this report was run, which was earlier this week, there was a 53% budget, or 53% of the technology budget is still available. Now let's see. Oops. Okay. The other thing I want to touch on is the control agents. Now, when we assign budgets to departments and schools, we assign them to a control agent. And so this control agent is responsible for making sure that the budget, or that the monies are being spent as needed, and that we are complying with all the rules and regulations, and that there's POs in place. And so the control agent is a 2-digit number that identifies the department that's responsible for ensuring that these rules and regulations are followed. So you have, here's some examples. So the 61 control agent is for our elementary, 62 for middle schools, and 63 for high schools. So going back to the report, if you look at this report, you see that those numbers there right after where it says description. Under description, you have construction, and then you have a 43, technology, 44, security, 46. So every department has a control agent, and so when we budget, we allocate those dollars to control agents, and then they're responsible for making sure they administer those funds that in a way that they're allowable, and they meet the district's educational objective goals. Okay, and so then we go on to our due to, due from. And what I call this is the IOU or you owe me part. And on here, I think the best way to explain this for me is if you take 2 buckets. So you have your operational bucket, which we've been, talking about, and then you have another bucket. And so we'll call this bucket our Title I bucket. And so this Title I bucket is part of the special revenue funds. And so a lot of our federal funds operate a little bit different. Now, we talked about SCG, and SCG is a distribution, a revenue stream that we get from the state. And every month, we receive money in the bank. It's like a paycheck. The money comes in, and we have money. We just have to make sure we administer that money correctly. And then we have another bucket, and that bucket is one of our federal funds, for example, Title I. Well, the catch here is that bucket is empty. there's no revenue in that bucket. So when the way it works is we have to expend money before we can get reimbursed for that money. So what happens is you have your Title I bucket going over to your operational fund and saying, hey, I need to borrow money because, and when I get that money back from PD, when we bill PD, you'll get your money back. And so that is our due to, due froms. And so it's money due to operational, due from Title I. And so, yes.
So to get that money back is when you guys send, I guess, rationales and your proof of what you did, and then how long does it normally take to come back?
Yes, and so Erica's our RFR. She makes sure that there's a billing that's done every month, and I'll go actually over to this next slide, and I think that'll explain that for you. Okay, so they're called RFRs, or they're requests for reimbursements. So most all special revenue funds, some federal and some state, run on a reimbursement basis. What that means is that the district upfronts an operational cash loan to these funds. The operational loan to the funds is reimbursed when PED reimburses the funds for these expenditures. These funds have a zero cash balance, meaning that they do not get reimbursed for that they only get reimbursed for the amount spent. If the expenditure, and only if the expenditure is approved. So here's the thing, if you spend something that was not in the application, you're not going to get it reimbursed for that expenditure. And so that is where you have your program directors, and the program directors are very vigilant and making sure that when those funds are being expended, it's only for those authorized expenditures. Because otherwise, we're going to use our operational dollars to cover the cost. So then again, expenses must be allowed and aligned with the application submitted by the program director in order for them to be considered reimbursable. Unallowable expenses, like I said earlier, need to be observed by the operational cash. And so what Ms. Erica and her team, and Ms. Lopez do is every month they go in and they bill PED twice a month. And so this illustration here at the bottom is intended to kind of show how that works. So say you have expenditures under Title I, July 1st through the 15th, and say you have $50,000 in expenditures. And so after the 15th of every month, finance will go in there and they will go ahead and bill New Mexico PED for those $50,000. Then, days keep coming, and so then you have an additional billing that happens the 16th through the 17th. Well, during that time that those $50,000 are outstanding at the end of the month, operational needs to loan your Title I $50,000 so it doesn't show a negative balance. And then when those monies come in sometime in August, we reimburse operational for those $50,000, and then you have the next billing, the 16th through the 30th, and again, we're back into a reimbursement basis. And so that's how those due to, due from transactions work. So this is just one bucket. Like I said, we have 38 buckets, and all of them are a little bit different. There's some buckets that are empty, there's some buckets that have cash on them, and we kind of just have to manage those. And so I guess at this point, I'll stand for any questions. And like Mr. Dempsey said earlier, we do have a burning questions document link that has been sent out. I know sometimes you're just still trying to figure out or put things together. And so if you think of any additional questions, you're welcome to write those in the burning questions document, and we will make sure and get back to you on those questions.
Is this available to us, like the presentation? Has that been sent out?
I can go ahead and make it available to you. Yes, I can
Thank you.
email a copy.
Sorry. Let's see, so the 38 buckets that exist, is there like a list of ways that money can be utilized? I know that there's the control agents, and then they're the ones that are looking to administer those funds, but are there like certain caveats that they have to follow so that, that there's that equity between, okay, if I'm, we talked earlier about athletics as an example, right? So if they have, they're going to let the campus utilize some of that money, or they're going to pay some of that, whatever expenses there, then another campus wants to do the same thing. So what are the rules? Like, do they say, well, if you have 20% available within the campus, we can do the other 80%? Or is there something that has a norm?
It does vary a little bit by fund, and so it really is, a lot of times it's up to the program manager to kind of say, okay, this is how we're going to braid funds so that we can accomplish a certain objective. So sometimes you do have to pay for certain expenditures from two different funds. How those are distributed, it's really up to the program manager, or the program or the control agent. I can tell you for operational, the way those funds are distributed is based on the student enrollment at each of the schools, and so that's how operational funds are distributed. For Ms. Nugez, I know that she covers a lot of the district-wide athletic events, and so I know she does, she covers officials, she covers, salaries, and she covers overtime, travel, but how exactly those funds are distributed would probably be a question that we would need to ask her.
So then the same would be like for, let's say, S&P. They have, that's a separate bucket that has a lot of money, or there's lots of funds available, but they, so whoever administers those funds, do they have access to making the decision, like, let's say, payroll? There's the operational funding for payroll, right? Or does that have to go through finance, and you all are the ones that have that decision on what it's going to look like?
When it comes to payroll, it is a finance decision. Those decisions are not left to the program managers, and here's the reason why. Is some funds, like student nutrition, luckily they've been well managed, and so they have cash. They have a lot more cash than maybe some of our other funds. And so it would be almost unfair if you had, say, student nutrition saying, well, you know what, we're going to give all our student nutrition people 25 cent increase, and then maybe you have our custodial staff who's also an employee of the district, but maybe they don't have the funding, so they don't get a 25% increase, and so then your salary schedules start to fluctuate or different areas, and then you have programs like Title I that usually has a really nice allocation, and so employees who are paid from Title I funds would have higher salaries, and maybe employees who get, paid from Idea B. So when it comes to the payroll decisions, yes, those are made in the finance level, and it's something we manage, or I manage in finances.
And then going back to the, you said that now the instructional materials will go through SEG. So does that mean that it's going to be like bottom of the line, middle, where is it going to be, middle?
That's a good question. To be honest with you, I'm still confused with the top of the line, the bottom of the line. I don't understand, but what I can tell you is that when we go to spring budget workshop, they tell us this is your SEG, and then they tell you within your SEG, you have X dollars that are to be used for instructional materials, and they even tell us where to code that revenue and the expenditure.
pieces I might add. I think it's a really important conversation that when we talk about different departments, and Ms. Villalobos can, she works through this just like the student nutrition and the custodial and salary schedules. So let me use social workers, for example. There are social workers in Mr. Rapinet's program, and there's social workers being paid by federal programs, and they tie to a salary schedule. So like this year, when increases go up, they both have to be able to afford that inside their budget. Or if they don't, operational has to either step in and provide, and some people, I actually think some people in this room might be split funded. I'm thinking Mr. Rapinet, part of his salary, very much, a portion of it could come out of IDAB, and then some could come out of, you are too? So Rosie's split funded as well. Some out of operational, some out of Title II? Title I. And so just kind of keep those kind of things in mind, that kind of the salary schedule, like Ludima was describing, gets set by the district, but then everybody has to meet that expectation within their budget, which is, that's really the struggle, the challenge right now, is everyone to understand these salary increases. I don't think anybody is against them at all. We just have to be sure we've built enough room in our staffing model to accomplish all those salary requirements and still have a balanced budget. So we've been really, that's where we're getting to be really strict on hiring FTEs or hiring positions. When I say an FTE, I mean a position. And also could very much then, and that's going to start here soon, where we feel like what we can show you by numbers, a campus is overstaffed, and we're going to be asking people to go to another campus. And that's going to start here in the next few weeks, where we realize, and the CBA guides who that person is, last in, first out, and that all sounds really simple until you get to secondary, and then it's not, because they have to have a very specific credential. I can't move a language arts teacher from Gadsden High School to go teach math at Gadsden Middle School, right? They don't have the credentials. So then it becomes the last in, first out math teacher, right? And so just keep that in mind as we're working through this process. A lot of those movements, and I believe yesterday, Ms. Chavez, correct me if I'm wrong, only 4 or 5 transfer requests, very few. And so transfers to me are a great opportunity. If someone is wanting a new challenge, they're a volunteer. That's terrific. That's easy. It looks like we're not going to have as many volunteers as I might have hoped. And so there's going to be some individuals moved. So,
Mr. Dempsey, I just want to extend on what you were saying in regards to the split in regards to our funding pieces, like if you're funded through Title I and then IDEA B and all those pieces. But it's also something that I think that you kind of mentioned, Ludim, is we're very restricted in some areas. For example, if intervention teachers, if Rosie is funding, if Title I is funding that teacher, we are not able to ask that teacher, for example, during the school day if they would teach like a regular class because they're funded through the Title I piece. But if it's half operational, half Title I, then maybe they could teach one of the language arts classes, like at the middle school, let's say. I could allow a teacher to do language arts class, but depending on the amount of funding that comes through each program, for example, if Title I funds 0.75 of the day has to be in the intervention Title I funded classroom. If they're in operational, it's 0.25. So that might be one class depending on our schedules. So with the way things are done, we're very restricted in being able to move people or being able in just, depending on what they're hired for. I know currently that Title I is funding some of our district instructional coaches, Rosie, is that correct? And so we are, we always worry about budget, especially right now as salaries are increasing, because if they're funded through Title I and Title I funds aren't increased, then operational won't be able to pick them up because we already asked Title I to help us.
Right now. Title I is funded right now 101 positions.
Yeah.
Title II is funded 9 positions, and Title IV is funding 5 positions. And what happens on Title I, the challenge right now that I'm like, my concern right now with the salaries we fund all the intervention teachers, all the instructional coaches, most of the instructional specialists in the district, and the instructional specialists at the pre-Ks. So it's a lot of positions that we are funding. We fund some of the technicians in the district. So it's 101 positions that we have, which means that is, right now, is like 60% of Title I is going to our salaries. So we don't know how much we're gonna get next year, because Title I, you never know when we receive the allocation letter until May. So we don't know how much we're going to have, because the state may go up and giving us all the revenues for all the salaries, but not necessarily federal funds are going to be increasing. And that's kind of like the challenges that we're facing right now, because we don't know how this is going to play. Because, we have no clue how this is going to be. So we have to be like very strategic in our planning and say, okay, because we support so many of those things, and it's not easy to change a position and say, okay, let's make it operational. There's something that is called supplanting that is very restricted on the federal funds. So it's not that easy for us. If we move a position from federal and we change it to operational, we cannot move it back again, ever. That's kind of like a law on the funding. There are a lot of restrictions on the funding when we use federal funds. You cannot just be moving positions. It's very restricted.
Yeah, and that's right. I think Rosie does touch on a very important, and that's supplanting, because, it would be so easy to say, well, this year pay it from federal, and this year move it over here and move it over there. But the catch here is, if there's a position that's federally funded, especially like our Title I, if you move that position to be paid from operationals, you can never move it back. And so we have to be very careful when we're looking at budgets to make sure that if operation takes in additional FTEs, that it's something that we can sustain. Because once it's moved in, you can't just move it back.
And Ludim, on that piece as well, with the titles, like Title I, Title II, Title III, sometimes you'll hear pieces like, well, I thought we can't hire any more people, or we're creating some positions. Well, for example, Title II allows for the creation of the mentorship piece, because we don't have that. So that's funded through that. Is that correct, Rosie? Otherwise, and so people might say, well, they created another position, but that title is specific for the relating to either legislative action or pieces like that. And so currently we have that funding because we don't have the support for new teachers.
What it is like, that's when we need to understand what each title is for. Each title has a
specific purpose,
a specific reason to exist, and why they are, and why they're giving us that. Title I is for our students in need. And for example, in order for us to determine how we're going to use Title I, this is completely about equity. And these funds are used in proportion to how, for example, the way we do the Title I application, you really need to use the direct certification that comes from the STARS on the 48 and 120 days. And the way to allocate the funds is according to the poverty level on each one of the schools, how many students are on the poverty level, and based on those numbers and how the resources are assigned per school, because they told me, well, you have to assign the same money to each school. No, I'm not. I assign to the school according to the number of students on the poverty level.
And I think that's...
And that is very specific, and I don't know if you want to see that,
but I think that
we
that's
can have
where
that very clear.
sometimes...
If you want me to show it, I can show it if you want to. But Title II, for example, is very specific just to support of administrators and teachers and education of the teachers and how we support teachers, Title II. And that's one of the requirements of Title II, is follow the guideline on the state on the mentorship program and everything that we do to support teacher retention, teacher hiring, and teacher support. So Title II is allocated completely to our teachers and administrators, how we support them. And then we have Title IV, and Title IV is completely different. Title IV is according to, it's kind of like our newest title, and Title IV is for the support of the wellness, being, in technology, so wellness of the student, what we do for the students that is kind of different and has 3 different parts: the wellness of the students, the technology component, and how we make sure that the students are being successful in school. So that's where we can cover things for like the attendance, things, innovative things on technology, things like that, as we allocate the title for. And that's, for example, how we can provide support. For example, now that we're going to have our new mental health therapists in the high schools, is because of Title IV, because they work on the well-being of the students, and that's how the funds are going to be allocated.
Rosie, and just to clarify something for our board members, is this is where you might sometimes hear from a campus that a school has more money, because they've been allotted, they're operational, but when you do the at-risk factor, one school may have a lot more money because they're considered the highest poverty school in the area or in the district, and so some schools may have the ability to do a little bit more with that because they have the funding, but like Rosie said, that's not an option for us to distribute it evenly. It's provided to her by the state, and so those. And I think that one of the things we're trying to do as an administrative team is inform our campuses about that, although it's difficult to understand sometimes, because all they see is like, well, they got $20,000 more and we didn't, you know. And so I think that that's one of the pieces we see often with the campuses, and I'm sure you guys receive some of those calls as well.
And just, to add to the board, or to add to it is, so sometimes when we bring bars to you, you'll have an initial bar. So we have increased bars, and then we have decreased bars. And sometimes you'll see an initial bar. And what initial bar is a fund that didn't exist. It wasn't part of the initial budget, but it's a new fund. And sometimes we have funds that are put out there by the state, and they come in kind of after the budget has been set for the year. Like the example would be the Family Income Index. And so that fund came after, so that when it's initially budgeted, or when it's introduced to you, you'll see it on the board agenda, consent, and it'll be an initial bar. And so that's how you will know that there's a new bucket that wasn't part of the, the approved budget.
I'm thinking of one item that I'll loop back on federal funds, and Ms. Martinez mentioned the application process. So those applications are being done now for next year. So this is where sometimes I think you might get phone calls as board members that a teacher or a principal wants to do a project and then comes to Ms. Villalobos and says, well, I need some dollars for it. And Ms. Villalobos, unfortunately, many times has to say, that doesn't fit our application. So it's a timing piece as well. So really, in order to implement something, you have to be about a year out in planning. And so that's why it is, and I stress out Rosie a lot and Ludine, because we'll go to a conference, I'll see something I get really excited about, and then I come back, and then they're looking at me like, well, that's not in the application. Or we're going to have to find dollars to do something like that. And when we try to implement, kind of why I've tried to work on kind of pilot type projects, so that then I could go to Ludine and say, Ludine, can I have some cash balance? Do you have some dollars available to this small project? Because if I do it district-wide, it's going to be expensive. And I got to make sure it's accessible before we blow this thing up district-wide. So sometimes you might get a teacher or even a principal come to you and say, well, I'm trying to do this, but the district won't give me any dollars. Well, in part, now's the time that they need to be already, really, they're probably late to the party right now. If they came to Rosie and said, would I like to do this new project? You've actually already probably missed that planning. And so we really, what they need to be do, like I said, is a year in advance. And probably in the fall, they need to be working with federal programs and leadership to get that implemented the following school year.
Mr. Dempsey, so based on what you said, are we communicating to our teachers? Because I'm thinking even just as a teacher from another district, and even when I worked here, I had no idea about that. So how are we communicating that to our teachers so that we also avoid that perception that, well, they don't want to fund me if nobody ever communicated that to us?
I'll say every chance I get, I try to explain that as best I can, and, we'll obviously continue to do that. Part of it is an engagement, and I'm not faulting anybody, but, sometimes, and I was guilty of this as a teacher, if it didn't impact my world, it didn't really matter too much to me until it impacted my world. And so attending board meetings and reading all the things, the Monday morning messages, the opportunities, talk to your trenches. In trenches, we talk about this all the time. Trenches is a group that I really try to use to educate them, because in my mind, they're going to go back to their staff and their colleagues, and they're going to have that conversation with them. So whatever I try to, the knowledge I try to impart on them, they're taking back. So I try to work really hard with that group to educate them on the budget process. And our leadership team, Ms. Martinez, Erica, Maria, they come into trenches and share with that group, with their knowledge and understanding of things.
Okay, so that is awesome that I would hope that every trench leader, which is a teacher,
Yes.
takes that information back. Now, I would also hope that administrators are, I guess I'm going to ask you this, how do administrators then, because trenches person is doing that, but then, you have administrators, and I believe they're required to attend board meetings, and so how knowledgeable are our administrators to also inform our teachers of these possible available funds, but that you have to communicate or get in contact with so-and-so person, because that's the opportunity to advocate for innovative ideas at their campuses. But if that's not happening, then you could start, then we get calls of, why is that campus have that and this, and I'm like.
Mr. Dempsey, may I answer that just really
Sure.
quick? Just to jump on that piece, Ms. Flores, great question. So one of the things we implemented this year was the Principals Academy at the beginning of the year, and they actually had the budget workshop themselves. And one of the things we have found, this is something that we are continually working on. Finance also created videos for them about how to look at their funds, right? And be able, because we found that a lot of our administrators really didn't even know how to use their money. Their secretaries were managing their budget. And so that was our first step, because we did catch that piece, and we do know we still have work on that. And the reason I jumped in to answer it is because we're planning, as we plan this summer in June, that's also part of that piece, because Ms. Ludim, do you want to, Mr. Dempsey, you want to talk about how you guys implemented that sweep this December for the campuses? They did something because we found they weren't spending their money.
So, and there's actually a question in the chat box from a participant, and it's a good question. But so this year, Ms. Martinez, one of the things we struggle with is sometimes we'll see a campus or a control agent wait till now in the spring to complete large orders. The problem with that in the past has been that maybe those orders don't get filled, and then that PO has to be closed, and so we're trying to do some things to strongly encourage them to spend those monies early. So what we did is we allocated an amount and said, if you don't spend it by December, we're sweeping it back and redistributing, so you lose it. Now, we can't do that with all funds, and Ludim may have to get more specific in that. And then, but keep in mind that as a principal, I'm given, and help me here, I'm given access to, based on enrollment, or maybe other factors, I'm given operational dollars, I'm given title dollars, I'm given SB 9 dollars. Can you think of any? Some at-risk, a couple schools get at-risk.
Right, so, right, and there's other dollars that come in through like fine arts. But yeah, I think you've got most of it,
Right.
Mr. Dempsey.
So as a campus administrator, I have access to those dollars. So if I want to do something, I have access to dollars to do something. I have some choices there that I have to make. And so, if I choose as a campus administrator to spend my entire operational dollar, and this, I'll just be a little silly here, but on erasers, even though we have Chromebooks. Well, you're just going to have a closet full of erasers, and you don't get any more money. So you have to be thoughtful with how you plan that out. And to a point that was made earlier, one of the patterns we were concerned with, and a little bit still seem to be concerned with, is we may not have our administrators in as much control of those dollars as we need them to, meaning the planning. There's nothing illegal going on. It's just they're not planning with those dollars, and then they wait till the end. Now, you think of now post-pandemic, and I think we're I don't know, are we officially post-pandemic? Maybe. The supply chain is incredibly taxed. So if orders aren't done now, right now, they will not be completed by June 30th. No way. So if they haven't had a plan and they try to do those late spring POs that are big items, they're not going to get them. And then the other thing I know, we've heard about it, and each of you hear about it, is the purchase order process. People get a little frustrated because we're just so used to convenience, if you will. So, personally, if we want to go buy something, we take our debit card and we go down and buy it. And we can use our phone, and there's all kinds of convenient ways to do that. Spending public tax dollars, it really shouldn't be convenient, because it's got to be thoughtful, right? And that's why that purchase order process is so important. And we, probably every week, poor Georgina gets a call about Amazon or some specific vendor that doesn't take purchase orders. But that process actually protects all of us, because it gives such a clean line of you requested something, a purchase order was in place, you ordered it, you knew the amount, right? Then you get invoiced, and then a check gets cut. It is so, there's no room for Mr. Dempsey did something different with those dollars. There's no room for that. That's why that purchase order process is so important. And I know it's frustrating, but it also means that as a math teacher, and I want to do a specific, maybe I'm trying to think of a project I might do, right? And maybe I was gonna do a project where students have to construct a house and use a scale model of a home. Well, then I have to get all those materials. Well, then months before I'm ready for that project, I need to make the request. So I have them before the project, not the week of. Like, I found this on Pinterest, and I really want to do this with my kids. Those days are over. They really are. And so that's when, I kind of get a little ruffled when teachers will say, because I feel like I'm not doing enough when I hear a teacher say, well, I spent $500 of my own money. And it, really, I think it hurts Ludim, it hurts me, Erica, I know Rosie, because we feel like we have dollars that could help you. But the question is, did you plan it? Or did you just figure it out this weekend, what you wanted to do? And then there's no way I can help you. And so it has to be very thoughtful of what we're trying to accomplish here. So,
Mr. Dempsey, so I just wanted to make a comment. So I totally agree. Did you plan it with enough time? But I will always advocate, did we communicate with enough time that there's these available funds? And I know you're working on that, so that's awesome. And so I appreciate you all. I think you said, Mr. Hernandez, that in June, you're going to, in your principal academy, you're going to be touching and educating our principals on budget, because then that way they're their biggest advocate for their campus. And so teachers that are listening, hold yourselves accountable, and your principals, and be involved. Don't just be pointing the finger, because there's 3 pointing back at you. And then I did have some questions, and I believe because Ms. Murillo is listening. And so, but I think her question was answered, because she did text, or not text, she placed on the burning questions. She asked, how are the principal funds determined? How can they use it? And do they have to spend it all by the end of the school year? So somebody responded, it depends on the specific fund. For example, the district allocates operational funds to the campus based upon student enrollment. Operational funds that are not spent by the end of the year are swept back to the district and reallocated. So just wanted to thank, because she has said, are they answered? I'm like, I think they answered, but no. And then I question on the presentation. I did notice that the chat is disabled, so the public is not allowed to ask questions unless I'm, oh, yeah, because on my end, it says disabled, unless I'm not doing this correctly. Yeah, because on my screen, I'm actually following along on the computer, and it says chat is disabled for this live stream.
Madam President, I guess while they figure that piece out, I do want to share something with you. If you go into the district website, if you go to finance, our finance, we have a link here, and it's called Finance Department Tutorial Videos. And I just want to share this with the board members because I know it's a lot of information to look at. But if you go in there, we have tutorial videos, and they go over different things like how to understand the chart of accounts. And we made this so that the principals could always go back and refresh their, and then we have how to access and understand and print budget reports. So we kind of step-by-step process on how they can do that. How to activate a new vendor, how to submit a change order, submit an IPR, and just difference. But there is one video in here, how to understand the universal chart of accounts. I really encourage you to take some time and watch this video because I think that will help you kind of bring it all together. And then, after watch that video, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to our finance department. Yolanda, Erica, or I would be able to assist you with that. But I just wanted to share that with you really quickly.
I did have...
I'm sorry? Oh.
I just wanted to mention that, in addition to the tutorials, we also created, I guess, kind of like cheat sheets next to it for the people that are more hands-on so that you can print it out and then follow along. So we've tried to make it as user-friendly as possible.
That is very awesome. Thank you. And thank you for the cheat sheets, because there's those of us who need that. I did have another question, and I'm not sure who said it. Somebody, I believe it must have been, I think, our superintendent. So with the salary increase, I think that we're being conservative, and then this was made cutting off. So I know we're being conservative, and you all are doing an awesome job, making sure that we're not overspent. But so it was mentioned that overstaffing. So I guess as that comment was said, I'm thinking, how did we get to overstaffing? So if a salary increase we're grateful as teachers that we're getting the salary increase, but it's affecting us. I can see it's a good thing, but at the same time, something that we need to make sure we have enough money. But so I guess what worries me is when I hear overstaffing, that we're going to have to transfer people. How did that happen, and why are now we concerned about that? Is it just because of the salary increase, or how do we get there? Because that's concerning to me.
I want to say that without a doubt, the driving factor is the salary increases. These are big jumps. They're significant. And so we're just having to be very cautious and thoughtful. When I try to answer the question of how did we get there, I think over time, if there were space to give a little bit of room, and maybe it didn't qualify for a full-time position, but there was enough for a part-time, and it became a full-time. And so, I think budget-wise, we want to go as far as we can go, right? We want to try to put as many adults in front of students as we can to support them. But what's happening now is with these significant increases, I'll give an example of some secondary, like for example, and you got to keep in mind that I feel a little bit more comfortable. I taught in elementary, I never was a principal, so I never did those elementary master schedules. I did a lot of secondary master schedules. So when I look at those, I'll give you an example. We might have a pathway at a high school that the individual has a full teaching schedule, but only covers 80 kids a day. And their colleague down the hallway, who's a math teacher, Algebra 1 maybe, covers 150. And then you add block, and you think about it, if I'm on a block and I only have 80 students on my caseload, I only have 40 a day. I can't keep doing that. Those are the, I'm going to say those are the type of situations that we can't afford any longer. So there's a solution, and it doesn't mean something has to go away. What it would mean in that case, what I would do as a principal, I'd say, okay, let's just say it's a CTE program. That means there's 4 classes in that pathway. I'm going to do what's called stacking. So let's just say it's welding 1 and 2, and then welding 3 and 4. Let's use welding example. So I'm the welding teacher. I'm going to have welding 1 and 2 the same period. I'm going to stack. And then I'm going to have welding 3 and 4 the same period. And I'm going to have to plan my schedule to where I do my classwork on one day, and then I do my lab work on the next. Or I may do a couple days of classwork and a couple days of lab work. A lot of project-based type projects or assessments, if you will, right? And then now with the rest of my schedule, I may need to pick up, I'm the welding teacher, but because I have a CTE license, I also can do construction classes. So then in the afternoon, I'm now going to pick up some construction classes. So I'm going to have more classes to prep for, but then I'm covering, where last year I did just my welding classes, I covered 80 kids. This year, I'm going to cover 140. And so you're maximizing that resource. Okay? And there's another piece, and you know, I don't want to alarm anybody, but Gadsden for the last 10 years, before me, was on a declining enrollment. It is on a declining enrollment district-wide. Now, there are pockets of growth. Chaparral is definitely a pocket of growth. The ST area is a pocket of growth, but everywhere else is on a declining enrollment. So we have to be also very thoughtful in that piece. Mr. Hernandez, you want to add something? Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, Mr. Dempsey. I just wanted to add that we have the decrease in enrollment, but we've maintained the same number of staff that we've had in the last couple of years. The other piece, too, is currently we've been looking at our numbers on campuses, and while we have some schools really growing, we also have found that currently 4 of our schools are under 300 students. One is at about 303, one is at about 350. So we're seeing that drop in enrollment, and that was just a concern that we started seeing. We have one at, I believe, 254, one is at 220. I mean, they're dropping and drastically, especially some of our areas. And so I think as we move forward, even at our level in central office, we chose not to hire 2 of the district specialists, so we're going to do a different model for our specialists as well. For example, Title III monies, which are bilingual funds, they do not allow for funding for salaries, so those bilingual specialists are actually funded through operational. And so those are those types of pieces that we're kind of reorganizing as well in order to be able to maintain the momentum and support for the campuses. Is just going to look a little bit different. Currently we're still definitely want our coaches on campus. That's why we're investing so much in making sure that they're able to support the campus. But I know even at our level, we're looking at slimming down some of our pieces, although some positions may be created based on whatever the titles might require districts to add or sped, right? And so those are some of the reorganization pieces we're working on. And so our goal, and correct me if I'm wrong, Lupita, I don't want to step on toes, is that through attrition, through retirements, through all those pieces, you may hear somewhere someone called us, Mr. Dempsey, if you recall, and said that we were cutting jobs. So no one's being cut. Everybody's job is safe, and it'll be a plan as we go through the years. It's going to be a long-term plan, but we do have to make some changes. The other piece is we started looking at actual classroom numbers. So we do have classrooms there's one campus that has, let's say, 3 kinder teachers. One teacher has 11, one has 12, and one has 15. And so, of course, we take programs into account if it's a dual language campus and all those pieces, but the reality is you could have combined those classes, and then they all 3 have an IA, for example, when the number for an IA is 15 or over, right? And 18 to max, like at a kinder class. So we're looking at all those pieces and see how it impacts, but we don't want to impact the instruction piece. So we think that it's just, we're looking at it very strategically, taking into account the programs. Because, it looks easy saying, oh, they need these many teachers, but we understand some campuses have more SPED units than others, so they may need more support in regards to IAs, an extra teacher, all those pieces. I mean, Mr. Rapina we all sit as a team and actually look at those pieces. So really now, the administrator, if, let's say, we're asking you that you're going to lose a teacher and needs to be transferred, the administrators can still come back and defend that position if they can, right? But if you know the schedules and you know those pieces, then just tell us why. Why is it that you need to do that? So it's not a definite all the time, but I think that's where we're going towards, Mr. Dempsey, don't you think? But I do know that 4 of our campuses are under 300 right now.
You want to share our intervention example?
Oh, for example, one of the intervention, one of our schools is one of our average schools, about 400 and some students. This particular school has 3 intervention teachers, where I have, for example, an elementary school with over 650 students right now, and they have 2 intervention teachers, right? And so we had another school that we couldn't find a kinder teacher, so the intervention teacher went to kinder for us for that piece. So we decided to transfer another individual from this school that had 3. The person chose to resign instead of driving to the other school. And so I think that it's important, and we talked about this in trenches, about just making sure that, we were focused on the kids right now. It's a short-term solution because we really didn't have the kinder teacher at another campus. And, part of it was, well, I'm going to leave 64 kids without intervention. Well, you have a campus who has no intervention. And so we're just trying to really work on trying to we talk about the equity piece and about supporting, but I think that as a team, we need to do it together, right? And it was unfortunate because the person was somebody that could have really helped us out till the end of the year for those students. But that's just one example. But then we have people who, whatever you need, will move me tomorrow, move me here, move me there. And so HR is working with people individually, and Mr. Dempsey. And so it's just going to be a shift, but I think in the end it'll benefit all the students.
I had a question on what you just said. I understand, like one campus 3 and the other one 2 or needs more, but how, I guess, I don't know if it's the time to ask, but how come that other campus doesn't have the other one? Who decides, and why isn't that other interventionist there?
Actually, that every campus has 2. They have a math and but this particular campus, and actually it's Yucca Heights, overnight it has gone from like 600 kids to, I think the last number, like if we look at it every week, it went like to 620, 630, 650, it's the growth piece out there is killing us right now. In fact, actually it's your area, we have the pre-K there at Yucca Heights, but some of those students, their homeschool is Desert Trail, so we have started to receive phone calls in regards to, well, I want them to stay there, but the bottom line at that campus is there's no capacity at this point. We did another assistant principal because it's now bigger than the middle schools, all middle schools except Gadsden Middle, right? But it's just, we're trying to figure out a plan for them, but it's just been challenging because the numbers, I know that we're getting ready to move portables over there as well, right? Or they're in the process of moving them, but she has no space. Her classrooms are, and then there's no space for other teachers, there's literally no space, no other classrooms, we can't do anything currently, but it's pretty, we're working with HR and the PED because the kinder classes are at 20, we have to ask for a waiver now, right, I believe?
She was able to go ahead and transfer.
Oh, so she's helping us out too. See, a teacher, I mean, I know they volunteer, they're voluntold, but they're part of our, they're part of the team. So she transferred like a 5th grade teacher that we could combine 2 5th grade classes, and that teacher went down to a kinder. So now we're at 4 kinder classes there? 4 kinders. So we're working, we are working, but currently there's no room. We can't give her another anything because there's no room on her campus. But she's a team player.
I'll just add to that, and this is how we learn. 2 years ago, we were out there looking at attendance zones, and we weren't aggressive enough. Our original plan, right, the community, they had some concerns, and they shared them with us, but we're in this boat because we weren't aggressive enough with those attendance zones. And that's we got to get back. We'll probably have to get back out there this summer, and we're going to have to move that attendance zone.
I guess my last question regarding staffing is, I'm a teacher, and there's obviously colleagues that are teachers out there, and so when is the district going to start also looking at your endorsements? And I, from one, it's hard because if you say you have bilingual ed, you have special education endorsement, you can teach at the middle school, at the high school. I see that as an opportunity. You are a very, melusos, person, marketable. However, at the same time, part of me is like, I think you just said the word, voluntold. We work as a teacher. I mean, myself, I have to be flexible if somebody asks me to, it's your livelihood or not that they're going to fire you or anything, but you're given choices. So I think we also have to be flexible. But at the same time, if the person absolutely does not want to move to whatever because they're endorsed, I mean, I don't blame them. So like, what are we going to start doing that, or what are we thinking?
Obviously, you always want it to match. I mean, you have to have it match with an endorsed person, highly qualified, and the matching point is, I want to be here, right? Because, they're not going to be excited about it if they, didn't necessarily want to do it. But the hard decisions have to be made this year. And it comes back to student needs. So if I have a bilingual classroom and I have a teacher that says, I'm bilingual endorsed, but I don't want to teach bilingual, I can't. Do I put a sub in there for a whole year or half a year? No, this year we're going to have to move that bilingual endorsed teacher to that classroom. And I know that's hard. Now we mentioned SPED here. Keep in mind that SPED is kind of a unique position of its own. I'm never looking at class size for special education. In the end, with special education, we're looking at what are the students' needs, and those are driven by IEP. And so you could very much have a SPED classroom with literally 8 or 10 kids, maybe 4 or 5, depending on the needs, all by themselves. You could have that. But anyone that wants to argue that amount of work with, right, with IEPs and the high needs students, and it's not even close to the conversation. But keep in mind, I think back to answer your question, this year we're going to have to make those tough decisions. Now keep in mind the CBA is the guide for that. Last in, first out. But you make a point. So I have a bilingual elementary, say it's a 2nd grade bilingual classroom. Who was my last bilingual teacher hired in the district? So if my position is at North Valley and the last bilingual endorsed teacher was hired at Yucca Heights, that Yucca Heights teacher is going to North Valley. Now, will I try to be reasonable? Maybe I have another person who's at Anthony and says, hey, Mr. Dempsey, I'll do that for you. Oh, okay, I can make that work, right? But in the end, the non-negotiable I think we all have to try to understand is kids' needs drive everything we do. And you ask the question, how did we get overstaffed? Sometimes adults' needs have had influence on the budget because there's been room, right? I mean, it's just like our own kids, right? My youngest daughter was probably better at negotiating money out of my wallet than my oldest. Well, when the money gets tight, though, nobody's getting anything, right? And so now we're getting really serious, right? We're getting to the point to afford these raises, we're just going to have to ask everybody to maximize their class loads. And we're not asking them to do anything unrealistic, in my opinion. And I don't think it's going to be that bad. I guess I'm trying to put out the worst case scenario, and then the hope is it's nowhere near that bad, right? There's only a few movements that have to be done. And we are starting with administration. I mean, we mentioned here how we're absorbing some positions. We're looking at our admin staff on our campus, and campuses under 300 probably will have to share assistant principals. They'll have a principal, but they'll be sharing an assistant principal as opposed to having one full-time, and that's some additional savings we'll try to capture before we get there. And with the number of retirements and resignations, I actually think we're going to be fine. We're just going to be very careful about advertising positions.
I just wanted to clarify on the endorsement part of it, because right now would be a great opportunity for those teachers that are wanting to go ahead and teach something other than what they've been teaching. Endorsements are like language arts, reading, math, something like that. But when you get from elementary to a SPED, then they do have to go through an alternative certification program. We have an awesome partnership with LEAP that right now would be the best time if they're wanting to go into a SPED classroom or vice versa. And we don't encourage that a lot, believe me, we don't. For SPED coming into an elementary setting or to secondary. I mean, it could work either way. We just don't endorse getting out of SPED. We try to go ahead and get individuals to go into the SPED setting. So, but that does require for you to go back and get through an alternative certification program to get that license. Unfortunately, they're not endorsements, and we can't easily just say, Maria, you're going to go into SPED without her having to put in what needs to go ahead and happen for an alternative certification program. And just to reiterate what Mr. Dempsey said, I mean, we've worked really, really hard to at least place these individuals within the area that they live at, but some of these resources, and you've heard Mr. Dempsey say, Chaparral is really growing a lot. So where we do have those possibilities of transferring individuals over to Chaparral, I mean, no one is losing their position. Nobody is losing their job or anything like that. It's just the school location may not be the same for next year.
And so, I guess, have we already communicated that to teachers, and when is that going to happen so that we have no surprises? Some are probably listening, might be freaking out, but I was going to say, come to Chaparral, the best community in Gadsden.
Right. Well, I would encourage, I believe we have attempted to communicate that, but pay attention to Monday's morning message. It'll be included.
Thank you. And all our communities, I shouldn't have said that, but I probably are like, no, they're not. Miss aquí me echó unos ojos, she rolled her eyes at me. All of our communities are beautiful, and every community has something special to offer. And so, I mean, sincerely, I say it is come to Chaparral, you'll enjoy it out there. And our kids they deserve it. Everybody has smart kids, but like I said, we're all part of our own communities. There's uniqueness aspects, and so what's the drive? No big deal.
The northern school, the southern school. When we work for Gadsden, we are just a reminder, I mean, we all work for Gadsden, so wherever we're asked to go, and it's a pre-K, early childhood to 12, and it is for Gadsden Independent School District, and working for here, you may have to go Chaparral, Sunland, all the way to Bottle, North Valley and stuff.
Okay, so one more thing is, I would encourage my colleagues to, is like, I'm not pointing the finger. If you've been teaching 5th grade for 20 years now, awesome. Maybe that's what you want to continue doing, that's awesome. But I would encourage you, try other grade levels. Like, even, even I'm encouraging by elementary, try middle school, it's not bad. And then maybe it is fun, it's a different world, yes. But, if you feel that you're stuck in a rut, and you're not giving it your best, try another grade level, the opportunities are there, but if you're happy where you're at, that's awesome too.
I would also add that, teachers that are interested in moving to administrative positions, it's a huge benefit if you've taught multiple grade levels. If you've only taught, kindergarten for 28 years and you want to jump to the admin side, what do you know about 6th grade? What do you know about middle school? I think anyone would agree that if I want to be an elementary principal and I know what my students need to learn for middle school, I'm going to do a better job of preparing them. And so I would strongly encourage, especially the people who are thinking of administration, do multiple grade levels. Maybe you have a general ed endorsement and a SPED endorsement. Do some SPED, get some experience there, right? Do middle school, do elementary. As much experience as you can gather is only going to make you stronger and truthfully a stronger candidate when you go to those interviews. So if you can list on your resume multiple grade levels and success at those, gosh, you're a much stronger candidate than someone that, maybe you've been in the district 12 years, but you've taught elementary, you've taught SPED, you've taught middle school, and you've done, maybe a couple other things. You might be competing against someone who's got those 28 years as a 1st grade teacher. You're probably going to be you're going to be a better candidate than that person with seniority on you. And so keep that in mind as people are reaching out with those concerns. Get as much experience as you can gather.
I guess my first question, when does this new raise go into effect?
It'll begin next school year. Now, I say that, and I'm sure the dean's like, yeah, but there's one part. There's one component of it that actually will occur this year. And I think we've decided what we're going to call it. We're going to call it a salary adjustment, okay? In some language, you're seeing retention stipend, but here's why I'm concerned about that language. If I give someone a retention stipend this year, am I guaranteeing them a contract for next year? The answer is no. But I don't want them to get a false sense that I am, and I don't want to get tied up in any legal issues. So I'm going to call it a salary adjustment. It means I'm going to increase your salary this year. You're going to get a one-time check that increases, the amount you took home. That does not give you a property right to a contract next year. So I'm going to be real careful with that. But that rolls out this year. The big chunk of salary increases begins it'll actually go into effect July 1, and I think most of our staff will see it middle or end of August as they come back.
Do you want to talk about how the language is?
So the current language in House Bill 2, keep in mind, says classroom teachers. Doesn't say anything, $15 minimum and classroom teacher, and sets minimum salaries. What we're going to try to do, and we're going to, Ms. Martinez and her team are working really hard for everybody. in the end, what would I love to be able to say? I would love to be able to say we have the highest paid staff in the state of New Mexico, the most motivated and most highly qualified. I'd love to be able to say those three things, and we're shooting for that. So what we're going to try to do is shoot for this thing to give everybody as much of a raise as we can, and then when we get our planning unit value, the number that we plan with, we may have to cut it back, and so we're going to have to start reducing things back, and that's where that averaging language comes into place. Okay? So some may get more of a raise than others. We can't change that. Our goal is to give the highest raise we possibly can and still make it fit in the budget. The budget is still going to have a number that says you can't exceed this, right? So we're going to try to give those across the board, but the reality of being able to do that is probably, if we were to say we're going to do a 7% across the board to everybody, I don't believe the dollars will be available to do that. We're going to have to give some people less. Ludine?
And just to add to that, earlier in our presentation, we talked about those SCG monies and how they make up 95% of our budget. So when we look at our budget, we have to, because unfortunately it's not just salaries and benefits, there's other expenditures that need to be covered, like general supplies and materials, purchasing of vehicles, gas, travel, training, all these things. So when we look at the budget, when we look at our revenues, what we try to do is stay within a comfort level when it comes to salaries and benefits. So usually that percentage varies from 84 to maybe 90%. And really when you have other things, like right now we have everything's going up. So salaries are going up, that's a good thing, but we also have other things going up. So, electricity is more important, groceries are more important, are more expensive, gas is more expensive. So where maybe in the past I was comfortable with a 93% of the budget going to salaries and benefits and leaving 7% to kind of operate the district and other things that come up, this year I am thinking that maybe we need to be a little bit more conservative because it's not just salaries that are going up. So that percentage may need to be, we're going to look at that carefully because I know Mr. Dempsey really wants to give everybody an increase, but we also have to make sure we can sustain those salaries. And we have to make sure that we leave enough budget for those added costs like gasoline and professional development. Just, we can expect that inflation is also going to affect our regular day-to-day expenditures in the district.
I would add, and this is the first time in my career we had a situation where probably last year at some point we did a bid, not a proposal, a bid. And so when you do a bid, that is the lowest cost, right? The people that respond to that bid you go with the lowest cost. We had one of those vendors reach out to us and say, we need to adjust this because I can't afford to do this. Now, because it's a bid, we aren't going to allow that, because once we do that, then every vendor is going to do the same thing. But that's a trigger that says, and this is real important, this had to do with paper. Think of the amount of paper we go through as a district, right? So what do we anticipate the next time we go out to bid? That thing's going way up, right? Because I don't know if it's their transportation expenses. I don't know what is driving those pieces of this, but they are, we're going to see increases in everything else we're doing. So that's what Ludine, and I push Ludine as hard as I can, and then Ludine pushes back on me and reminds me, all this is going up, electricity's going up, paper's going up, all the things we do is increasing. So that's where that balance that we try to strive for. And then there's a reality, and I know this is a hard reality because we don't handle probably our personal finance like this, but while there are some flexibilities, in general, once the budget is set, the budget is set. So if, once it's approved and PED's given us the green light and we're going, if there's a wrench to get thrown at us, it is a tremendous amount of, well, you're taking from somewhere else that you hadn't planned for. Even if you can move it and it's allowable, you didn't plan for that. So that's the thing that as we're thinking of changes or thinking of implementing new programs, we just have to be very thoughtful. And we, again, I know I've already said it, we have to be about a year in the planning stage to roll that out. Yes.
Thank you. I guess you said something, and because I'm thinking of, okay, so you said classroom teachers. So does that mean that our specialists, like so they will not qualify for the raise?
Well, no, well, so based on House Bill 2, it's not required to give them a raise. What are we trying to do? We're trying to give everybody a raise. But the requirement is classroom teachers. That's the, so if you got really strict on this, really strict, you would say, if you're not a classroom teacher, you're not getting. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to give everybody an increase. And there's some components that will help us. We're in a great place because we're already an extended learning time district. That's an additional set of funds. And the new K-12 plus program, not K-5 plus, K-12 plus, I think we already have about 90% of the things in place to capture those additional dollars. So financially, I think when we get, into this next school year, we'll be able to look at it and say, oh, yeah, we were in a good place. But it's really hard to anticipate those funds and me be able to tell Ludim, okay, this program is going to capture this amount of money and this program is going to capture this amount of money. I don't know all those things yet. So just keep that in mind. I think the dollars will roll in, but she can't make a budget on what I think. She has to make a budget on, I know what this amount is. So just kind of keep that in mind a little bit.
And I guess my last question is, so with these increases, are we, where is this money? What I can't wrap my brain around is, where is this money coming from? It sounds like it's not coming from anywhere except ourselves, or, the money for the salary increases of teachers and this raise. And so it's, because you know how we have conversations where the head or the governor mandates, when we say unfunded mandates, and then we have to pick the cost up. So with this signing of salary increase for teachers and then everybody getting a raise, where is that money coming from? Can you help me understand?
Maybe. Let me try to explain that. It's still coming from SEG. The question that I think you might be asking is, did it get sized correctly to do all these things?
Yes, I guess that's what I'm asking, because it doesn't sound like it is.
I can't answer that, really, because when they size it, that's the big pot of money in Santa Fe, that somebody says, well, to do this is what will happen, across the state. That is a really difficult... Well, Ludim may be able to throw some numbers at you, what it might cost, across the board kind of things, but these are significant. I mean, these are, probably, I don't know, Ludim, would you estimate if we were to do across the board raises of 7%, no averaging language, $16, $18 million?
Actually, Mr. Dempsey, if we were to do those kind of increase, we would be looking close to $25 million, because remember, benefits are also going up.
Oh, benefits.
And now that's also on the higher end. So can we receive that funding this year? Possibly, but will it reoccur next year? Will the money be there for the following year? So we have to be careful. I have to be very careful, because the last thing we want is to give all these increases to everybody, and then the following year the money doesn't show up, and at that point the only thing you can do is cut positions, and that's what we don't want to do. What we want to do is give those salary increases in a way that we can sustain sustain them, not just for this year, but the following year. Another thing that I think Gadsden has that we're actually going to really need this year is that cash balance, because there's a couple of things happening. You know, we cannot use our cash balance for salaries and benefits, but we also have those additional costs for other expenses, like gas and electricity and everything going up. You know, I may have to come back to you during the year and say, you know, that money we have set aside, I might need to take some of that to cover some of those expenses. And right now, some of those expenses have been set aside for long-term projects, and obviously there's a break in the supply chain, and we don't know how those things are going to roll out, but just, I think in this coming year, there's going to be a lot of pulling and things that are going to come up that we didn't necessarily expect. I think with costs going up and inflation, hopefully that'll be under control, but I do expect that at some point, we might need to tap into some of our cash balance.
Ludima, I might give an example, and thank you for that. Transportation. Transportation is one of those 38 buckets. Right now, today, the bucket doesn't have enough money to cover our transportation expense. We supplement, we take about $500,000, I think, out of operational. What's happening to the price of diesel right now? What do you think is going to happen to our transportation budget? It hasn't changed too much. So we're probably going to be more dollars are going to have to come out of operational to cover that transportation budget, and that's a requirement. We have to cover that contract. That's not an option. The other thing I would mention, and this is a little detail, but I think it came up somewhere. The $15 an hour minimum is for Gadsden ISD employees. Bus drivers are not Gadsden ISD employees. So I can't mandate that. Even if I wanted to, I can't mandate that. And I'm not sure what the contractor will do. The contractor has typically in the past tried to match anything we do. I don't know if they will or won't, but I just want the board to be aware, because you might get approached by a bus driver that says, hey, you know, I'm really excited about that $15 minimum wage the district's doing. We can't guarantee that they'll receive that. It's just like the employee enhancement compensation that we offered. I'm still working on this, but every person I've talked to now says cannot do it. That's an anti-donation clause, and so I want to, but I also can't violate procurement code. Got to stay out of trouble.
Okay, so back to something that you have brought up earlier, Mr. Dempsey, in regards to teachers moving and going, moving from school to school if we need to. Now, is there any way that if we're going to move a teacher to a different school to maybe if they're moving to another school, maybe kind of like reimburse travel time or do something like that to help them out?
Unfortunately, there's no tool for that. There's no mechanism for that. Now, we have started to do some things, and I got to be real careful with this, but like I have some hourly employees, my security team. Those are hourly employees. Some of our, honestly, they're on our lower salary schedules, and at times we're asking them to cover multiple schools. And in fact, we've been short at times. We even have, I think of a couple that are in the Chaparral area that have needed to come over. So what we've done is we've taken a district vehicle, set it up out there at one of our campuses so they can drive the district vehicle over. But for teachers, there's no way I'll ever have the funding to do that. I understand the concern, and I understand a staff member who has that piece. There's just no way I could ever commit to that because I just can't pull it off. But we'll try. I guess my point being, I want to try to work with them that maybe I can get, my first step is always just ask for volunteers. ask if you have volunteers to fill certain positions. I think that's where we start. But I don't want the board to feel like I may have to go further, and I won't. I promise the board that I'm not going further, meaning I'm not going to, it's not going to be an involuntary transfer unless the student's need is there. That's what's going to drive it. It's not a last name. It's not who's connected to who. It's not who's been nice to Mr. Dempsey, right? It's none of those things. It's not who's a Cowboys fan, even though, well, maybe it could be. The ones that are Cowboys fans go far away from me, but they're not, the 49er fan have to go way, right? But it's come down to student needs. And so if I have a classroom with a need, that's what I got to focus on. And I think we can all fall back on that, is student need drive decisions. And one of my points that I'll do in the Monday morning, and I want to point it out, and I'm going to try to emphasize it, is that, gosh, where are my notes here? One of the priorities that I have in terms of staffing is protect all current staff, not protect all current positions. See, sometimes people, they got to remember that I'll be asking certain people to do more than maybe they had in the past. Right? And so another example, I can think of an art teacher right now at a particular campus that has maybe 40 or 50 students on their roll. So next year, if I can't fill classes, they may teach part-time at that school and then go down the road and teach part-time at the other school. Right? And then the neat thing about that is I could add art to another campus, which is something we really need. So people just have to be willing to do those things, and I know I won't be able to reimburse them for mileage, unfortunately. Hopefully it'll be on their way home. Hopefully I can find a school that they're going to drive by anyway, and then they're on their way home. Right?
Going back to the point that you made earlier, especially with the educators that we have out there, that only teaching one grade level, okay? As my experience working in the health administrative area of it, you are more marketable or market-wise person if you learn more than just one what's the word? More than one technique, per se, more skills. Okay, because I know the way that I've coached and the way that I teach is don't be good at just one thing. Be good at everything. Like college coaches, when they're playing softball, they're not going to look at, oh, well, this girl plays great at third base. I need her for that. No, they want a utility player. Play all positions. Do what needs to be done to sacrifice for the team. And it's the same way with the health part of it. We got to learn. I just can't go say, okay, I'm going to go do a total knee replacement, and that's all I'm going to learn. Okay, I may be good at it, but then they're going to come back and tell you, well, there's no robotic cases right now. Can you do a gallbladder? Can you remove a gallbladder? Well, I've never done that before. Then your value as a surgical technician or as a nurse or whatnot kind of like starts going down, and not knowing where your future is going to end. So you gotta put your hands in everything, in everything. And I agree with you on that.
I think we've covered what we did on the burning questions document is Mr. Carmona got that posted on our website. It'll stay, we'll leave it there, and so if people want to add questions, we'll continue to respond to them, and then I can do a screenshot or capture it out and I can send the results of those. The one athletics question, I want to get some specifics, and I'll get Ms. Nugis to give us an answer this next week. But if you have, as you're driving home, I don't know about each of you, as I drive, I probably have some good thoughts. don't do this while you're driving, I'm not encouraging that. But when you get home, jump back on that document, add that question, and this week we'll get you an answer, okay? And keep in mind that budget has a lot of complexities to it. You won't learn it in one workshop, but over time, you'll start to feel more and more comfortable with it. And then when people ask you questions, you feel confident to respond to them. And that helps us. Okay? Ms. Flores?
I'd like to request like a, what did I say? You want recess? You want recess? What did you say? Como a piece of paper that gives all of us and to the community, like request for FR, whatever that is, you know, I'm a blank. Like what they mean, please, because I know like even when we, acronyms, that way, it's available to us, to the public, and that way it's our cheat sheet, because I know that when we are in board meetings and the information that we get is what is accessible to the public, and I know we talk in education a lot with acronyms, but that way, if you come across it, then here's a document, you can know what that's about. So, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we can work on that. We get very used to those bars and RFRs and, right? SB9, and you're going to go, you know,
Yes,
people go, what? Right? So, yeah. Okay, well, again, I always appreciate everybody's time. Ludim and your team, you guys are just amazing. Thank you for everything you do. And this is not the last of our budget meetings or our conversations about it, probably the beginning, because Ludim does at least one or two more budget meetings, and then we'll be talking about it a lot during upcoming board meetings. Okay? And then keep in mind, House Bill 2 has not been signed yet. But remember, and I learned this year, it typically is the last bill to be signed because there's a rule that the last bill signed takes precedence over any others. So if there's ever a conflict, House Bill 2 will take precedence over any other bills. So I'm confident it will be signed, and once it is, then of course we'll get moving on next year's budget. All right, thank you all.
Thank you.